Welcome, everyone, to the Developing and Implementing National Cooling Action Plans in Africa, an interactive workshop for officials and civil society. My name is Brian Hawley. I'm with the United Nations Environment Program, serving on the Cool Coalition Secretariat. We are delighted to welcome you here today. We have a couple of hours of various speakers, interactive questions and answer sessions. You'll be able to submit questions during those Q&A sessions via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and click on that at any time and submit questions or comments. And once we get to those points in the agenda, we'll go ahead and go through some of those and try and make sure that we address them as best as possible. Given that we have a full agenda, you can see all the speakers here on your screen. We're going to go ahead and dive in with our opening set of remarks by my colleague, Mr. Richard Munang from the UN Environment Program's Africa Office. He's the Regional Climate Change Coordinator for Africa. Richard, over to you, please, for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Brian. Excellencies, distinguished participants, welcome to the Regional Capacity Building Workshop for Africa that will discuss delivering energy efficiency, climate-friendly cooling through national cooling action plans as part of the Africa Climate Week 2021. I congratulate U4E, UNEP-led Cool Coalition and collaborators, C4All, E3G, and Clean Cooling collaborators for bringing us here today to discuss a crucial missing piece in climate action, energy, and a long sustainable development puzzle, which is sustainable cooling. The forest is not only for hiding species or people, but it's full of man's medicine, healing power, and food. This African proverb analogizes cooling solutions. They are beneficial on the one hand, however, still they can be very harmful to humans and environmental health if we fail to transition them to cleaner, safer sources. Globally, cooling services are essential for achieving many desirable human and developmental outcomes. For example, adequate cooling underpins cold chains that preserve food and vaccines, and it provides controlled indoor conditions in hospitals, in schools, in office buildings, factories, and beyond. But in doing so, our planet is paying the price. Refrigeration and air conditioning are estimated to account for up to 10% of global carbon emissions caused by energy use and leaks of hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants. Therefore, the urgency for remedial action is unquestionable. 49 days ago, the IPCC in its seat assessment report showed that the globe is on a path to breach the safe 1.5 warming limit in just 2 decades from today. It means the climate-induced socio-economic challenges Africa faces, from food insecurity to declining economic productivity to health, among many, will only escalate. The opportunity to mitigate emissions in cooling is one we must urgently seize. The UN Environment Program and the International Energy Agency cooling synthesis report showed that by combining energy efficiency and refrigerant improvements in refrigeration, we can avoid the equivalent of 4 to 8 years of total annual greenhouse gas emissions in just 29 years from today. In the Africa region, the IEA projects electricity demand for cooling is on track to jump tenfold by 2040. But what we know is that access to cooling in the region remains a significant issue. Up to 359 million people in Africa lack access to cooling, putting them at high risk. Across the continent, an average of 50% of what is produced is lost, and this is an amount valued at 4 billion annually and could feed over 300 million people. Sustainable cold chains would reduce food losses, boost farmer incomes, and enhance the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goal. For example, decentralizing simple solar fridges has been proven to reduce losses and enhance incomes. I am happy to note that Rwanda government, and in collaboration with the University of Birmingham and the UN Environment Program, brings together multidisciplinary experts with commercial partners to develop and demonstrate ways of delivering affordable, sustainable cold chain systems. To achieve complete transformation, we need to act quickly and boldly to transition to climate-friendly and energy-efficient cooling. The holistic and integrated approach of the reduce, shift, improve, protect strategy needs to be adopted at the country level, which is about smart buildings, which is about nature-based solutions, which is about super efficient equipment and appliances and renewable technologies. In the region, we already have pioneer countries developing NCAPs such as Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, from whom we will hear their valuable experiences in this workshop. A great number of African countries such as Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Morocco, Nigeria, and Tunisia are integrating sustainable cooling objectives into their NDCs. I'm happy to share that UNEP, within the framework of the Cool Coalition, is ready to assist its member states in developing NCAPs. Building upon the tremendous collective expertise of partners, the Cool Coalition has created the first comprehensive methodology for NCAP development. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all the partners of the Coal Coalition who contributed to the development of this methodology. This workshop is a valuable effort to drive the implementation of sustainable cooling in countries throughout Africa and the globe. Let us therefore fully engage in taking this noble initiative to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manang. And with that, let's go ahead and pivot then, and we'll ask that Director General Cabrera join us when she can after this next panel. We'll pivot to Alice Uamalia from Sustainable Energy for All. She's going to moderate a panel of experienced officials who've developed or are in the process of developing national cooling action plans. Alice, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for having me and for having all of us here today. So let's, I'm going to start my presentation on just providing a quick context when it comes to access to cooling and the importance of sustainable development and resilience. Let me see, I'm not sure who's sharing the slides, so if you could go to slide 3.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm happy to. Yes. So in a warming world, delivering access to sustainable cooling is essential for sustainable development goals, and not only the SDGs, but as well as achieving some of the other, international treaties, such as the Paris Agreement, and as well as the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. We believe at SE for All here that access to cooling is an essential component of the national cooling plans. We have a Cooling for All Secretariat that we host here, which works with development partners and governments to deliver access to sustainable cooling. Next slide. Thank you. So just let's have, sorry, the slide before, yeah, thank you. So by first going to the global population at risk, just to understand exactly where we are today, we have identified 4 different population groups at risk and a spectrum of risk faced by this population. So at highest risk, we have rural poor and urban poor. So these are people who lack access to energy and also live under rural and urban poverty. As you can see on the table, some of our estimates for 2021 put this population at highest group or at highest risk at 1 billion people globally today. Going to the medium risk, so these are people living with lower middle income and living on less than $10 a day, and they're also outside of rural and urban poverty. This is the highest group today with 2.3 billion people globally. Going at the end of the risk, we have people with middle income, so people living between $10 and $20 a day, with that population being estimated to be 1.3 billion as of today. We've also identified what we consider as really cooling needs, necessary needs. So we have here human comfort and safety. We also have food and agriculture and health services that we consider key when it comes to access to cooling. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for the Africa context? Looking at the first graph, the bar chart, you'll see that for the rural population, the urban population, and the lower middle income population, there has been a slight increase since we started tracking this population in 2018. Now, some of the increase could be attributed to the poverty impact due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is unfortunately a trend that we started already seeing before the pandemic. So it can't be all attributed to that, but we have to remember the time we live in and the impacts that it can create. Looking at the table below, the far right column, you'll see that about 49%, so about half of the global rural population and about a third of the global urban population can be found in Africa. So this really puts into the context on why it is so important to identify measures and starting to include them in national strategic planning. Going to the next slide, we'll see how we envision Advocacy for All, how an NCAP should be drafted. So we encourage our partners to really go beyond equipment-based analysis when going about with an NCAP. So we have provided or identified some guiding questions which would really support partners going beyond and thinking about the overall cooling needs in their countries. So there are a set of questions that we can ask ourselves. So when it comes, for instance, to the human comfort and safety, we can start analyzing to what extent the population in a country have access to space and mobility cooling that is adequate to maintain safety and productivity at home, in places of education, or at work, in a work environment, and how, what do we need in order to achieve that? So this is really in order to go beyond just, when it comes to cooling equal AC, but really started to think a bit beyond that. In order to also support identifying and quantifying those needs, and specifically the population in a country needing access to cooling, we also, for instance, recommend looking at the SDGs indicators and targets, which can be a benchmark for understanding and starting to realize the extent of a cooling need in a country in terms of data and quantification. This would also really support, including measures that support major international treaties, such as the Paris Agreement. Now, a needs-driven national cooling cap will support alleviating some of the cooling access gaps, such as, it will promote the sustainable and smart cooling practices. It would also support bringing essential life-preserving services like vaccine and safe food to all people. Going to the next slide. This is my last slide, and this is just to really show the status update on national cooling plans globally and also for the African continent. So on the global map, you'll see that we have a couple of categories for countries. We have what we consider as critical countries. So these are countries with the largest amount of population at highest risk. So these are the rural and urban poor combined, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So these are countries with the largest amount of this population. We also have high impact countries. So these are countries with population at risk. And we do have a third category, so countries exposed to cooling challenges, but having mostly only pockets, either geographical pockets or vulnerable groups that are exposed to certain risks, but we can't really consider the whole country to be at highest risk, at high risk as the other categories. Now, for the African continent, you'll see that we have currently 5 countries that are working on or are involved in national cooling plans, with Rwanda being the one that has so far published their NCAP. And I would like to take advantage of this moment to really commend Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa on their work that they're doing and their efforts that they're putting into creating a holistic, sustainable national cooling action plan. So with this said, I'm going to stop this presentation and then we can start going to our panelists. So we have today representatives from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and we're going to be hearing about what led to the development of national cooling action plans and lessons from these experiences. So let me start with Mr. Marindani Kirui, who's a coordinator at the National Ozone Unit of Kenya. So can you please tell us about your country's experience in developing the NCAP, the motivation and the wider goals behind these efforts? The floor is yours, Mr. Kirui.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Alice, for that. And good afternoon, good morning, everyone who is participating. First of all, I wish actually to thank the organizers of this important workshop for inviting me to participate. Kenya, as you said, has actually developed the National Cooling Action Plan, but it is still in progress because it has not been approved yet, but at least we have done maybe 2/3 of the work. As we were developing it, first of all, the key stakeholders had to ask some questions. First, they were saying, were we developing national cooling action plan, or were we developing national cooling strategy, or they wanted to know whether it was the national green cooling action plan. So we had actually the 3 names that were actually proposed, and which I think while we were moving on, we had to agree after the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General mentioned about NCAP. So we adopted the NCAP. We forgot about the 3, but you could realize that people were raising issues to say we are moving to the green economy and we would wish to have the name green appearing in that. So since I said the NCAP is still in progress, we are actually moving to validation workshop next month in October. And once it is done, then that is the time we'll have to know the name that we are taking. So the National Cooling Action Plan for Kenya was actually done by the Ministry of Environment and Forestry with the assistance of GIC and CLAFS. And we really thank them for that. So from actually 2013, Kenya government decided to say they were actually doing what they call connectivity in the rural areas. And therefore, since they were having universal electrification, that is what made us to come up with the National Cooling Action Plan. As we know, that time we were moving and there was that negotiation of actually phasing out the HFCs, which were actually the global warming substances. So when actually in 2013, when it had been mentioned that that connectivity was going to have to happen in the country, the government also came up with some development plan that actually motivated the development of NCAP in Kenya. The Kenya government actually identified some 4 agenda issues as development plan. One of it is the food security. The other one is affordable housing. And then the manufacturing, the growth of the manufacturing in the country. And the 4th one was the health care. So with those the 4, programs that had been mentioned by the government, and all of them are actually involved in the cooling services. These made actually the country to move faster, to come up with this NCAP, despite the fact that Kenya has not actually ratified the Kigali Amendment. So maybe at this point you will know that Kenya has not actually done the ratification of the Kigali Amendment.
So maybe perhaps,
hello?
Apologies, yes. So if I can jump in on that and
Yeah.
just, take into account what you just mentioned, and I'm also looking at the time. Is there a key recommendation from your experiences that you could share with our guest and panelists here today, even if just from what you've learned so far from your experience, and then if maybe in a couple of words, one recommendation that you could give, because it seems that you've already done quite a lot so far, and I just came to see some of your lessons learned.
You see, my recommendation would be actually that because of the adoption of these cooling services, then we are actually recommending that while we are adopting the cooling services, we should actually move to the ones that are environmentally friendly, so that we have those cooling services being in line with what we are doing with the Kigali Amendment and the energy efficiency, so that we could have the energy efficiency. It's okay?
Yes, thank you. It seems that Kenya is really doing quite a lot of and moving fast. So I'm really looking forward to keep my eyes on your activities and see what will come out of your efforts. Thank you so much, Mr. Mahindani.
Okay,
so let me go to our next guest. Let's see. So I would like to invite Mr. Okon Ekpenyo, the Director of Energy Commission in Nigeria. So Mr. Okon, Nigeria has recently added action on cooling and its enhanced NDCs, and is also about to start the NCAP development process. Could you tell us about what has driven the government in taking these steps and what the NCAP development process is set to look like?
Thank you very much. And also I want to join my voice with my colleagues from Kenya to sincerely appreciate this opportunity. And also because of time, just go straight to the point that Nigeria recognizes that if you look at every household in the country that runs into millions, the highest energy consumption aspect is from the cooling, because every household that has not less than most urban household, not less than 5 air conditioners, deep freezers. And if you look at it after that, the next thing will just be the lighting. And then multiply it all, we observe that the temperature is also increasing. Of course, part of it being the effects of climate change. And after having looked at this, Nigeria now look at that we need to look at energy efficiency, especially in the cooling aspects. And I'm not just even talking about the hotels, the commercial sector, and other sectors. That if you go there, evaluate their energy consumption pattern, you'll find out that cooling takes the highest. Most household is not cooking with electricity. We don't cook with electricity, but gas. So that is one of the things that make us to say no. And Nigeria being so big, you cannot talk of getting or mitigating or reducing a consumption from a cooling sector without good plan. Hence, we now decided, or that is the main thing that motivates us to go into cooling action plan, NCAP. And apart from this, inside our, then of course, we now include it very clearly. Of course, right from the beginning, energy efficiency has been a major component of our NDC action. I mean, actions to be taken to meet our NDC's targets. But in this new revised, we have included it clearly that transition to efficient cooling will be one of our major actions to be taken so as to meet our targets. Of course, to do this, we need a driver, and since it has to do with energy efficiency and cooling, so the Energy Commission of Nigeria is working very closely with the Department of Climate Change to develop this. But we were lucky that in the course of doing this, Nigeria had support from
Mr. Okon, Mr. Okon, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Energy program, which is now
we seem to have some issues with your sound.
So we had support carry out. Yes. Are you hearing me? Were you hearing me before?
Your sound sounds a little bit distorting. I'm not sure if it's with me.
Hearing me before?
Not 100%. We're having some technical issues. I'm not sure if it's just me, but maybe if you're able to perhaps wrap up in terms of just the next steps when it comes to the Nigerian NCAP, because we're having some issues. So maybe also in a couple of words, if you can just perhaps wrap up, what is the next steps when it comes to the Nigeria's working on its NCAP?
Yeah, the next step will be for us to set up the stakeholder. Of course, UNEP is also, and the government of Nigeria is also including it in its own budgetary provision. So we believe that with this, we will now set up, with the technical support we are having from UNEP, we will be able to now start, because we have not actually commenced the development, but we will now start setting up stakeholders together that will be able to put this together. That is what I would like to say for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Okon, and yeah, apologies for the technical difficulties. But from what I understand, just a quick wrap up is that it seems that Nigeria has a strong focus on when it comes to energy efficiency, and there is a goal of including it not only in the NDCs, but also it's going to be part of the NCAP, which will be supported by UNEP, if that's what I understood.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, 2021 after a year on Zoom, and we still have this type of difficulties. So apologies, and I hope that I would really encourage everyone to keep their eyes up for Nigeria's NCAP and support them in any way they can. So let's go to our next, our final panelist, which is Mr. Mapudi Legodi from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy from South Africa. Could you tell us about your country's experience in developing the NCAP and the motivations and the wider goals behind these efforts? The floor is yours if you are online.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thanks, colleagues. Yes, I'm online. Alice, if you can hear me. Yes,
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, if I may come in there to just give a brief in terms of the South Africa's approach towards the development of the NCAP and the fundamental base upon which the development was based on. We started the development and the implementation of the National Energy Efficiency Strategy back in 2005, where the strategy had the horizon up to 2015. And it went into details in terms of the type of measures that we should undertake as a country and what government needs to do insofar as policy and strategies are concerned. And amongst the key focus area was within the focus within the residential sector. And then we developed a number of in fact, we developed a project around the standard and labeling project, where we developed the energy efficiency standard for about 12 appliances, including the cooling appliances, which in this case we are referring to in the South African context. We looked at the refrigerators, residential refrigerators, and the air conditioning systems. Now, we went through a process of engagement with the industry, the review of the national standards, which in the main focused on the safety issues. And now you're talking energy efficiency, which is something that was new, and industry was not very comfortable with the introduction of energy efficiency and the amendment of the current standards and regulations. But we took, the initiative to engage them to the extent that we agreed as a national priority requirement that we need to work together to develop the new standards for energy efficiency and for the specific appliances that we have selected. And in the end, we agreed on the format of the label and how it should look like. And we agreed on the energy classes for both refrigerators, residential refrigerators, and the air conditioning system. I must indicate that in terms of the air conditioning system, we were met with a huge resistance from the industry, primarily because we do not manufacture most of the, in fact, we do not manufacture air conditioning systems at all in South Africa. We import all of these products. And as a result, the industry was very reluctant in accepting our proposal. But in the end, we managed to convince them to at least have a minimum, agreed energy class for air conditioning system. But then we during the implementation of the regulations, which enforced the requirement in terms of the energy class, we then realized that given the high temperatures that we are living in today and which we are experiencing today as the nation, as the global community, most of the households today require air conditioning system. With the mushrooming of the residential settlement, we are seeing more and more houses now employing the air conditioning systems, which then pushed the numbers to the level unprecedented. And therefore, it required of us to address that. And to do that was also to look into the issues of HCFCs. How do we deal with the issues of HCFC? And how do we deal with the issues of waste management also? So we then had to engage with our environmental ministry to look at the measures that they've put in place to address the issues of HCFCs, to address the issues of e-waste, and how can we then, join hands to ensure that while we focus on energy efficiency, the movement of these appliances out of the economy, out of the market, needs to be well managed in terms of the waste management. And therefore, that's when we came up with the concept of developing the NCAP, and we worked closely with the Kigali colleagues in terms of the team there, assisted by the Lawrence Berkeley Lab in the US and the USAID. We then developed our NCAP, and which is what we have today. We've just received the final draft. It will be going through the final consultative process with the industry, and then it will go through the proper approval within the political sphere. And eventually it should be then adopted as a national document, which then would be, followed by the implementation plan in terms of the responsibilities of individual departments, the responsibilities of the industry, and how then do we put in place measurement and verification in terms of the compliance requirements. That is where we are today. And I think we thank as I've said, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory in the US, together with the USAID for funding, including the KSEP communities who assisted us with the funding. And today we've got the plan that we can share with other colleagues in the continent and see how best we can replicate the experience that we have endured over the time of the development of the NCAP, and how best we can implement it for the betterment of the continent in terms of the cooling roadmap.
No, thank you so much, Maputi. And perhaps in a few words, if you could give one recommendation to another countries that is thinking about studying with the NCAP, if maybe you've given some thoughts already, or if there is anything that you've noticed in your lessons learned that you would like to pass along to other colleagues, maybe in a couple of words.
Yeah, I think thanks, Alice. I think one of the key barrier is the misalignment of government departments or government ministries insofar as the climate change issues are concerned. In our case, we are in the ministry responsible for energy, and the issues around the climate change is the bone of the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, and all other programs that deals with the management of climate change issues lies with the Department of Environmental Affairs. So programs such as the e-waste management, the HCFC's management, and other initiatives relating to environmental issues lies with those departments. Now, when you come from the energy perspective, want to drive energy efficiency, component of the climate change sphere, you then find that the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, although they understand what you are trying to do or what you want to do, but they've got different approaches and different systems in place in how they want to implement the climate change issues. And that is where now it is important for governments to first align the two departments or the responsible departments and collect as much data as possible insofar as some of these appliances are concerned, and have an idea of the contribution and the penetration of these appliances and the rate in the country, and then put that as the fundamental base and the motivation to justify the need for the other department responsible for climate issues to participate in this program, because it has got ripple effect in terms of the implementation or not implementation thereof. So I think it is critical for governments to align. Secondly, it is critical to involve your stakeholders. The industry needs to be part of that process. It is critical to get the Bureau of Standards to be part of that process, so that you talk from a scientific approach, you talk from social approach, you talk from political approach at the same time, so that you can then move as a team and understanding what needs to happen on the climate issues. I think that is the basis upon which I can advise our colleagues in other governments in the continent to focus on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maputi, and I think you're raising valid points that many of our colleagues here would agree. I think, unfortunately, I need to start wrapping up this session in respect of time. So thank you, everyone, for your insightful remarks. We had here Mr. Okon Ekpeon, Director of Energy Commissions of Nigeria, Mr. Maputi Legodi from the Department of Mineral Resources of Energy in South Africa, and as well as Mahindani Kirui from the coordinator of National Ozone Unit from Kenya. I think it's very clear that the developing of NCAPs can help countries on the continent to create strategies which can bridge cooling access gaps while driving the transition to more sustainable cooling solutions. And thank you so much for all of your insights regarding this topic. I will now give the word back to Brian Hawley, who will guide us through the rest of the agenda. Thank you so much, Brian, and colleagues for your insights.
Great. Thank you so much, Alice, and to the full panel. That was a wonderful session. And now that we've heard from perspectives from officials who are currently underway with national cooling action plans or just on the cusp of finishing them, we will pivot to Director General Juliet Kabera of the Rwanda Environment Management Authority. Rwanda's had experience over the past couple of years now implementing their national cooling action plan. They refer to it as a national cooling strategy, in fact. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director General Kabera to share her perspectives.
Thank you so much, Brian, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for connecting a little bit late. I was struggling with the connection. Indeed, virtual has never been, you can't get used to it. You always get technological issues here and there. So I'm very honored to be here today with all of you to explore how national cooling action plans can support widespread access and use of efficient and climate-friendly cooling. I benefited a lot from the previous session. Colleagues shared a lot of insights on what is happening in their countries. And we all seem to be agreeing to this, that we really have no option but to go for the efficient and climate-friendly cooling appliances and systems. Thank you to the organizers and participants for gathering us to discuss these essential components to sustainable development. Given that this is a very complex and cross-cutting subject, I'm talking about the cooling, it needs to be addressed comprehensively by stakeholders across all sectors. And here I'm talking about agriculture, the building sector, the industry sector, but now the health. I think we all agree that with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, we terribly need a cooling, but cooling which is efficient and known and climate friendly. When Rwanda undertook the development of its NCAP 3 years ago, which we locally refer to as the National Cooling Strategy, as Brian already mentioned, there was an existing guidance. There was no existing guidance or precedence for us to follow. At that time, the government had an ambitious target related to cooling, such as our nationally determined contribution aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions up to 38% compared to business as usual scenario by 2030. But we had to start from scratch to develop the NCAP that connects with such climate, agriculture, trade, energy, and other targets across sectors. So it was critical that we don't come up with a strategy that is a standalone, but a strategy that is speaking to all these sectors. At least that was the initial thinking, and we are very happy that it took shape. The strategy helps our delivery of 3 international commitments simultaneously. That is the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And this is not only to deliver on those multilateral commitments, but it also helps to advance our national priorities. NCAPs need to be tailored to the unique circumstances of each country. So we started with a market assessment and decided to focus on areas which could be impactful in the near term, particularly refrigeration and burgeoning issues of air conditioning. Beyond short-term opportunities, Rwanda's strategy has a long-term vision, including building out sustainable cold chain and to collaborate more broadly in the region on standards and labels to achieve shared cooling objectives. I think someone from South Africa already talked about how they developed their labels, and that was really impressive. The strategy is not a one-time study or academic exercise without practical application. It serves as a call to action by top political leaders with the buy-in of key stakeholders groups, and it includes the blueprints for taking meaningful action. It provides a strategic overview with concrete recommendations which can be built upon over time as new needs and opportunities arise. The document is already bearing fruit since it was adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers in 2019. The critical step is awareness raising and implementation. I'm pleased to share that execution of the strategy is well underway. The government is partnering with United Nations Environment Program, specifically United for Efficiency team, to implement a range of recommendations through our joint Rwanda Cooling Initiative, which leverages funding support from the Clean Cooling Collaborative and the UK government. Specifically, we are focusing on Africa's most ambitious minimum energy performing standards, energy labels, and on an online licensing system. For monitoring the importation of air conditioners and refrigerators from the room, air conditioners and residential refrigerators. Developing a voluntary market-based financing scheme with local banks or consumers to access high-performance cooling appliances and recycle existing cooling products. Promoting sustainable cooling through a comprehensive awareness campaign and capacity building for technicians, custom officers, and others on the trade of ozone depleting substances to make sure that these substances are safe, that the trade is not hazardous to health. We do take a lot of time to focus on safety, energy efficiency, and other aspects. And then last but not least, we are hosting the landmark Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chains. With its headquarters are in Kigali, and plan for associated living laboratories in rural communities throughout Africa that accelerate the development of the latest technologies and best practices. Now is the time for joint action, not simply announcing plans and targets. I encourage fellow African officials to consider including their NCAPs, similar energy efficiency and refrigerant policies for cooling appliances, and coordinated efforts on building out the cold chain. This will make compliance smoother for manufacturers and enable greater economies of scale for superior cooling products and services, which result in a more affordable options for consumers and coordinated enforcement opportunities by officials. I'm very excited to listen, to have listened, and hopefully will continue to listen to the different discussions that are going to be coming out of this event, this webinar. Because I think we now know that it's about sharing experiences and how much you tailor those experiences that you've learned elsewhere to your situation, local domestic situation. The training module that follows by the coalition on the suggested NCAP development process will be a great help to those considering to undertake such processes. Rwanda will continue to share lessons learned and look forward to additional supporters and may be interested in collaborating with accelerating the transition to energy efficient and climate-friendly cooling systems. Thank you so much, Brian and colleagues. Apologies once more for joining a little bit late, but I'm truly fascinated and excited to be around this discussion and happy to learn a lot more from what other people, other colleagues are doing in their countries. Thank you and great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Director General Cabrera. And I would like to encourage all the audience members to submit questions. You have the option to use the chat function at the bottom. You can send questions in. And we'll have a Q&A session after the training module. The training module is coming up next. This will be on the NCAP development process featuring Marco Duran, Satish Kumar, and Jerry George. I would like to turn it over to them, but at any time during their remarks, you can go ahead and submit questions or comments. And then once we get to the Q&A session, we'll go ahead through as many of those as we can with the amount of time that we have available. Marco, over to you, please, on the training module.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. It is a pleasure being among you and among the excellent examples of national cooling action plans that have been discussed previously and also the success stories. It's very exciting. It's a very exciting topic, but it's also very exciting to see how much success and developments are already happening in the region. I will provide a brief introduction on the methodology that was developed for national cooling action plans. And I always like to start with this slide, because it was already discussed by Alice and by colleagues as well. But the benefit of having an action plan that can bring all the different topics together. And why? Because cooling is a very cross-cutting topic, as it is present in many sectors of the economy and also in society, from human comfort and productivity, also for mitigation of the impacts that heat waves can have, vaccines, medicines, agriculture, nutrition, and preserving the quality of harvested produce and fisheries to the market or to the households as well. And it is very important as well because it is so large and in many cases complex to manage that it is essential for governments to have visibility on the national demand, also understand the growth potential and consider how they can take action in order to mitigate the potential impact, but also keep it competitive and accessible to everybody. Then the NCAP, an NCAP has the potential of bringing stakeholders from the government, industry, and academia to the table to discuss needs, to understand what are the possible solutions in order to responsibly manage the demand, and at the same time to translate this into a document that can guide the actions that they will be taking. And then NCAPs also enable the interlinkages, of course, of the progress on climate action through the Paris Agreement and the NDCs, but also with the amendment, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol on the transition to low global warming potential refrigerants, and certainly to advance in the development in the Sustainable Development Goals. The NCAP methodology has been an effort by the UNEP-led Cool Coalition as part of its mission to support countries to transition to more sustainable cooling through strategic collaboration in partnership with the UN Asia Pacific Social and Economic Commission, ESCAP, and the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy, who were responsible for the development, or one of the responsible for the development of the India Cooling Plan, which is the most comprehensive at date, up to today. And then the Clean Cooling Collaborative, formerly KCIP. This was done also in collaboration with a big group, Cool Coalition Working Group on NCAPs, that has leaders and experts who have supported the pioneer countries on they develop already the NCAPs, such as the examples we saw before, but also across the globe. And then bringing the wisdom, bringing the experiences, and bringing all the learnings that we're translating to this methodology that will support countries in developing more. NCAPs can help on coordinated action. They can not only provide a diagnosis of the national situation, understand the context, and provide the recommendations as mentioned before, but they also can help in the coordination of prioritizing actions, also manage international funding. Where are we going to fund what implementation will be funded and what priority, and certainly to reduce also duplication as well. It's almost like a game plan where everything is laid out, and then the tasks can be distributed interministerially speaking, but also through different supporting partners. And we have some examples here below of the Rwanda National Cooling Strategy, then also, for example, the India Cooling Plan for your reference, the Grenada one, and the upcoming National Cooling Action Plans that were discussed prior. The methodology that will be, there will be a deeper dive in the next section, has 7 steps, and it is already available in the website. And just wanted to come back to this and how is this methodology linking climate action, Kigali Amendment, and SDGs. And I'm not going to go through detail, but the most important thing is that it was done also with a philosophy or a vision of not only considering the demand that is already met, meaning the equipments that are already serving and the demand that we're already supplying, but also to raise awareness and to understand what is the potential demand that is actually needed in the countries and where is it lacking, and how this not only where's the growth potential, but how can this be more accessible. And this of course interconnects all these different international commitments. And lastly, before I move to the next session, just wanted to share on how you can access these methodologies already in the Cool Coalition website. And as you can see on the right side, you can access it through our reports, and then you can also access the modules in the as seen in the arrow on number 2. Now, I would like to introduce my colleagues, Satish Kumar, President and Executive Director of AEEE, and Jerry George, who is the Senior Research Associate, to take the lead on the explaining the methodology. Thank you. Satish, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Marco, for setting the context and for highlighting the super collaborative nature of NCAP methodology development process. And all the organizations who have contributed are listed on the cover and last slides of the presentation. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Cool Coalition, UNEP, and UNESCAP for giving AEEE an opportunity to talk about and being part of this NCAP methodology development process. The presentation is in 2 sections. The first part that I'm going to be speaking on is the methodology overview. And then the second part is the deep dive into the process for cooling demand assessment. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Actually, you can go to the next previous slide. Thank you. Thanks also to Director General Juliet Cabrera remarks on how Rwanda is moving from NCAP development to comprehensive implementation. As I think this is a great example of how other nations can do collaboration and learn from each other. And I also found it very insightful in terms of when Alice talked about the Africa context and why cooling is so important to African countries, and then the individual interventions of Mr. Kirui on what is going on in Kenya, then Mr. Ligodi for sharing what South Africa is doing in the sphere of cooling and on the status of NCAP, as well as Mr. Ekpenyong for sharing what Nigeria is doing. These are all just great examples of, I think, what the group, when it set out to develop the NCAP methodology, what kind of, I think, the issues and the challenges and the collaboration that will be required when different countries develop this. Next slide. Thank you. The big question that the group which was responsible for developing the NCAP methodology, it tried to answer during the developmental process was, what can countries' policymakers do in the face of a warming climate to mitigate the risks posed to the country's population and adapt to the new normal. And this was informed by our own experience of developing India Cooling Action Plan under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, as India was one of the first countries to develop a national cooling action plan. The purpose of the National Cooling Action Plan is to have a holistic and yet modular guide map. It has been designed while recognizing the diverse needs and context that different countries may have. And as we listened, I think in the earlier session, national cooling action plans can drive such alignment by A, establishing a strong political will and meaningful nationwide directives, B, leveraging interlinkages with other government agendas, as Mr. Ligori also pointed out in his remarks, and C, setting direction and actionable targets for addressing access to cooling while maximizing the socio-economic benefits and reducing its environmentally harmful impacts. Next slide, please. So what are the foundational principles of the NCAP methodology? Let us delve into this particularly important question. Adaptability. While the methodology is providing high-level guidance, the development team must exercise high level of discretion and flexibility to meet the country's unique context and needs. And this came out time and again based on the experiences of different organizations which had the experience of developing NCAP around the world. The second part is the methodology must be simple and logical, enabling the countries to prioritize based on resource availability and unique requirements of countries. So we heard that for some countries, agriculture may be the top agenda. For another country, the building sector may be the most important sector that they want to focus on when they are developing cooling action plan. And the NCAP methodology allows for countries to define the priorities and the process that will be followed. The third thing is the data collection process must not be very onerous, as excessive and too detailed data requests can overwhelm stakeholders and add unnecessary complexity. And this is especially true where countries have limited bandwidth or limited capacity and capability to start answering to the very detailed questions that one can think about when collecting data for NCAP development. Next slide, please. So the NCAP methodology, especially for space cooling, follows what we call a lean, mean, and green construct that encapsulates an integrated and yet holistic approach. It starts with thermal efficient building design and construction with passive cooling practices at its core. This offers the single biggest opportunity to reduce the cooling loads at source, which will deliver cascading benefits throughout the life of the building. This is the lean part. The reduced cooling loads needs to be met with the most energy efficient and affordable technology or equipment possible, and needs to be operated and maintained optimally all the time. This is the mean part. And finally, the supply of cooling must be dealt while using green or natural refrigerants and renewable energy technologies to the extent possible. This is the green part. So in summary, right size the demand for cooling and optimize the supply of cooling. Apply both strategies in conjunction. Next slide, please. Let me take a few moments to describe the NCAP development process at a high level, something that Marco also mentioned. The first stage is the contextual assessment and planning, comprising of step 1 and 2. The second stage, consisting of cooling demand assessment, comprising of step 3 and 4. And the final stage of data and information synthesis and NCAP creation, comprising of step 5 through 7. All these steps are part of the multi-stakeholder collaboration, given the cross-cutting nature of cooling action plan development that earlier speakers have also referred to. Next slide, please. Let me expand on what I mean about the multi-stakeholder and collaborative development framework and why this is so critical. In today's society, knowledge and power is distributed across three segments. The first one is the public sector or government responsible for setting policies and regulation. The second one is the private sector or companies that are at the forefront of innovation, R&D, and technology development and dissemination. And third is the academic and the civil society organizations that focus on fundamental knowledge and science, public good, and equity to create a collaborative framework for effective intergovernmental and triple sector engagement. I do want to highlight the importance of a nodal/coordinating entity that owns and drives the process. As an example, I can share from my personal experience that during the India Cooling Action Plan development, the ozone cell under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change played the role of this coordinating entity. It worked with different ministries such as the Ministry of Power, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Department of Science and Technology, etc. Industry associations representing the cooling and refrigeration companies and working with civil society organizations such as AEEE, TERI, and CEW also played a key role. The ozone cell helped assimilate and synthesize the viewpoints of the various stakeholders and got the broad buy-in necessary for such a critical policy document development and implementation. Next slide, please. For such a cross-cutting topic like cooling, it is not something that can be addressed by one ministry, one technology company, or a professional segment. Integrated policy making became the obvious answer for India's cooling challenge while we were developing the ICAP. This style of policy making, while time-consuming and complex, sets a powerful integrative effect such that the whole coherent policy achieved through this policy making is more than just some of the individual policies and programs. Next slide, please. Coming back to the three stages that I briefly touched upon earlier, the contextual assessment and planning involves mapping of the country context, such as the socio-economic growth drivers, national targets, international commitments, cooling related policies and programs that already exist. And B, planning and pre-work that involves identifying the nodal government entity, setting the multi-stakeholder engagement process, and the National Cooling Action Plan development team. Next slide, please. I'm leaving this second stage to Jerry, as his presentation is going to dive into the detail of cooling demand assessment, which we all believe is a very, very critical component for any country that is starting this exercise. Next slide, please. The third stage involves integration of collected data and information into a cohesive country-wide view of cooling, followed by development of NCAP recommendations and creating a governance framework to monitor the progress and implementation. And just like the Director General talked about how Rwanda is doing, India is also right now in the midst of the implementation framework and how monitoring of the ICAP recommendations can be followed at the country level. Details of the three stages are included in the National Cooling Action Plan methodology document that Marco mentioned is available on the Cool Coalition website. Next slide. I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague, Jerry George, who has been a member of AEEE's core team that has developed the National Cooling Action Plan methodology. And he will be explaining the cooling demand assessment, stage 2 of the Cooling Action Plan development in more detail. Over to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Dr. Satish and Marco. So as highlighted before, the NCAP methodology has two distinct elements. The first one is an overarching NCAP development methodology that lays out the sequence of activities involved in NCAP development. And the second one is the data assessment frameworks, which give an in-depth view into the data gathering and data analysis of each cooling sector. So I will be focusing on the latter part, that is cooling demand assessment for NCAP development using data assessment frameworks. Next slide. So I'll begin with what do we mean by cooling demand assessment. So cooling demand assessment is at the heart of the NCAP development methodology. It basically constitutes a thorough data-driven assessment of the current and future cooling demand across all the cooling sectors. It covers the implications of future cooling demand in terms of energy consumption, refrigerant consumption, and greenhouse gas emissions. This data-driven assessment then forms the foundational logic behind the key recommendations of the NCAP, and eventually this will help guide the future of cooling in the country. Next slide. Now, countries will have a varying level of access to cooling across their population. This means that while the cooling demand will be delivered or met for some portion of the population, another part of the population will continue to lack access to cooling. Keeping this in mind, there are some key terminologies that we have used in the data assessment framework. First is the met cooling demand. The met cooling demand essentially represents the cooling delivered through mechanical means. It generally serves as the measure of cooling demand across the world. Whereas the demand growth to bridge the lack of access to cooling is referred to as unmet cooling demand. Now, the quantification of met cooling demand across all sectors is a significant undertaking in itself. But reliable quantification of unmet cooling demand is a challenging task where modeling capabilities are required. Therefore, the cooling demand assessment utilizes indicators that will help the country to estimate the unmet cooling demand to the extent possible. Also, the cooling demand assessment includes setting the baseline and future growth projections. So the future growth projection should generally include one business as usual growth scenario that assesses how the baseline will evolve around the ongoing level of effort. And there should be at least one intervention growth scenario, which assesses how the cooling growth will evolve based on accelerated efforts across policy, technology, and market enablers. Next slide. Now, when I say some of the key things to keep in mind while conducting the cooling demand assessment is that availability of good quality and enough data is a common challenge. And countries should leverage government databases, international publications, market reports to find the existing and available information that are already there with the country. And any data gaps can be closed using logical assumptions and expert interviews. It is also important to periodically revise the cooling demand assessment as and when new data becomes available. Next slide. So as mentioned before by Dr. Satish, cooling demand assessment is stage 2 in the NCAP development methodology. It covers 2 steps. Step 3 on sector-wise current and future cooling demand assessment, and step 4 on sector-specific recommendations and solutions. Next slide. Now for each of the cooling sectors, we have developed data assessment frameworks. They are intended as a tool to provide valuable guidance to the experts on how to engage in data collection and analysis for each sector. So we have covered 5 sectors, that is space cooling in buildings, food cold chain, healthcare cold chain, mobile air conditioning, and industrial process cooling. The data assessment frameworks identify the key data input that can be used to estimate the current and future cooling demand. It also suggests different pathways that the countries could take to perform the analysis and calculations. Next slide. Now, the use of these framework is intended to be directional rather than being prescriptive. The NCAP development team should exercise discretion to use the frameworks in a way that is best suited to the country's capacities, needs, and context. Also, the frameworks are not intended as a modeling exercise, but rather an approach that is within the reach of most countries and can enable prioritized action towards climate-friendly cooling. Next slide. Now, in each of the frameworks, we have mentioned 7 key activities. So activity 1 is on sector considerations that identify sector growth drivers, mapping prevalent technologies, and current policies and programs in the sector. And activity 2 is the sector objective. Activity 3 and 4 is related to what to calculate and how to calculate. Activity 5 is basically identifying and collecting the input data. And finally, activity 6 and 7 is to estimate the baseline and project the future growth scenarios. Next slide. So this slide presents a sample data analysis pathways for space cooling in buildings on what to calculate and how to calculate. For example, if we need to estimate the cooling appliance stock, we can either choose a bottom-up approach using cooling equipment sales data, or choose a top-down approach using building stock data and the penetration of cooling equipment. Similarly, there are different pathways laid out to estimate the annual energy consumption, refrigerant consumption, and GHG emissions. So the detailed information on these are also available online in the respective data assessment frameworks.
And Jerry, if I may, if you can go ahead and try to wrap up quickly here, we'll go ahead and do a quick Q&A session once you conclude. So if you can just summarize final perspectives here, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So Marco, next slide. So I'll quickly give another example of food cold chain. So in cold chain, we have various stages of cooling from production stage to till the product reaches the domestic consumer. So it is important to understand consumer behavior in the country, whether it is dominated by local markets or dominated by organized retail. So some of the key data indicators of cold chain include the local production, import of various food products, status of cold chain infrastructure, such as number of cold storages, and the existing food loss in the country. Next slide. So as mentioned, in step 4 and 5 of the NCAP development methodology is also closely related to the cooling demand assessment. So I'll cover this in my final slide. Next slide, Marco. So this slide presents the sector-specific recommendations and their integration. So it basically synthesizes the sector-specific analysis to drive meaningful solutions and future pathways. So I'll just give one example of space cooling in buildings. So for example, we can broadly classify the interventions in 3 categories. Like, for example, policy formulation and implementation, such as standards and labeling program, and market enablers and supporting instruments such as capacity building and training. And lastly, innovative financial instruments such as incentive mechanisms to shift the market towards energy efficient and low climate space cooling. I'll stop here for now. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Excellent insights, Jerry, Satish, and Marco, on the methodology informed by the world-class action plan that was developed in India, and also informed by other best practices from some of the countries we've heard of and elsewhere around the world. Great resource. Thank you for showing us its availability, introducing how it can be applied. I'd like to just pose one quick question which came in from the audience, and would direct this to either of the panelists that were on Alice's panel, or Director General Cabrera, if one of you could share with us a perspective on one of the key challenges that you faced, perhaps one that was unanticipated, but what was one of the main barriers as you undertook the development and finalization of your National Cooling Action Plan. So I'd welcome a brief perspective from any of those panelists or Director General Cabrera that you could share with the audience based on your experience. And perhaps Marandani or Maputi, given the work that you've recently been undergoing with your respective national cooling action plans, one of you could weigh in.
Thank you very much, Brian. I think, as I've indicated before in our session, the key challenges for us from the South African perspective has been around the alignment or the current misalignment of government ministries insofar as issues of climate change are concerned. You would note that I'm from the Ministry of the Energy, whilst the responsible ministry for climate change issues is the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, which is led by a different minister. So within the Ministry of Environmental Affairs, they've got a number of initiatives that focuses on putting in place measures to address climate change issues. Whereas they would also rely on energy to bring up on board some of the measures that the energy ministry will propose insofar as the contribution towards addressing climate change from the energy perspective is concerned. Now, what we have found was that the misalignment in terms of activities quite often put us or bring us to a conflict in terms of how we want to approach the proposed measures from the energy perspective, and how do we make sure that our proposal and our approach is in sync with what they are proposing from the climate change ministry or the environmental affairs ministry. Quite often that has led us to conflict because from the energy perspective, we want to move in a specific direction and we want to implement programs as speedily as possible. Whereas from their side, the approach is different, and often we find that we share the same stakeholders in terms of industry representatives, but they speak to industry representatives in a different way in which we are planning to speak to them. And often the industry would object to our approach because they've already had an agreement in terms of approach with the environmental affairs. Key to this has been in specific to the data submission or data collection, where the industry would want to submit data in a particular format that suits the Environmental Affairs Department, when in fact our type of data that we require for energy purposes is different. And they find themselves in a situation where they find leniency from another department as compared to the other department. And as a result, the development of policies and programs from government perspective are delayed by the fact that often we meet obstacles insofar as industry buy-in is concerned. So those are some of the challenges that we faced, and it makes life a bit difficult to speed up the program's implementation because the fact that it affects or it cuts across two different ministries who have perhaps similar goal, but different approaches towards reaching that goal creates a delay in the adoption of policies, delay in the implementation of projects or programs, and a division from the industry. So the best way to approach it is to first deal with the misalignment of the government ministries first, and have robust discussions within yourselves as policy developers, and then agree on the approach and how do you plan to engage other stakeholders that may or may not be directly affected by the programs as they are conceptualized by government. In that way, it helps the process in terms of getting the buy-in from the other stakeholders, but also it creates a political certainty in terms of the direction to which government is taking, and therefore there's found to be easier way of even securing funding to actually implement some of these projects. So I think that is the basis upon which I would implore our colleagues in other governments within the continent to first look at it that way, and then once you've got the buy-in from all stakeholders, all government stakeholders, then you would be able to move in with speed and in one direction. So I think that is where we are sitting. For instance, here in South Africa, we completed the NCAP. We've got the final draft. It still has to go through the political head's approval. Again, we still have to present it to the Ministry of Environmental Affairs and its stakeholders and get their understanding of the approach that we took, the benefits and the approach that we're going to take in terms of implementing it. And the fact that for it to be a national document, it has to be approved by cabinet, which involves their minister to also support such a document in the cabinet meeting for its approval. So those are some of the challenges that we are faced with. Hence, I'm saying, I think the best way would be to first deal with the alignment of the responsible ministries within government so that you can work as one and get approval or disapproval as one and strategize as one, engage industry and other stakeholders as one, and have a common policy direction and policy adoption approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maputi. And from what I've gathered, having seen quite a few of these processes unfold in Rwanda and the Caribbean and elsewhere, what you've described, I think, is consistent across governments. These same challenges arise, and for this to be practically implemented in a joint way, it needs to have coordination and buy-in across the board. Thank you very much for that. We also have a couple of other questions. Now, I won't ask those that those be answered verbally now, but I would ask that in the chat box, we get some responses to these questions, so that way we can pivot to the next panel. The first question, this goes to the Cool Coalition team. In terms of the methodology, is it possible to just focus on a few priority sectors at the beginning? Let's say it was transportation, or maybe it was in buildings or industry. And can you add additional sectors over time? Or is the methodology meant to be completely comprehensive and in-depth across the board from the outset? So how can it be utilized in sort of a stepwise fashion? Is it flexible? The second question has to do with the average time for the development of an NCAP. If anybody can write responses in there based on your experience, how long from start to, let's say, cabinet adoption does an NCAP take? So there's the development process itself, and then it gets the political buy-in and final sign-off. So if anybody could share those perspectives via the written chat and send that out to all of the audience members, that would be greatly appreciated. With that, I'd like to pivot to the final roundtable on funding and finance for NCAP development and implementation. I'd like to turn it over to the moderator, Larissa Gross, who's our research manager with E3G. Larissa, over to you, please.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of the great speakers so far. Welcome everyone to the roundtable on access to finance for National Cooling Action Plan development and project implementation. As Brian mentioned, my name is Larissa Gross. I'm a research manager with E3G, which is an independent think tank working to accelerate the global transition to a climate-safe world. Our cooling team at E3G is focused on the political economy and financing of sustainable cooling transitions. And we also co-convene with the Cool Coalition, the Multilateral Development Bank's informal dialogue on sustainable cooling. So today's topic is of particular interest. Through the informal dialogue that we're co-convening, we are working with a community of champions within the Multilateral Development Banks to mainstream cooling in service of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Agenda. And as we saw in Alice and Marco's presentations, cooling really sits at the nexus of these three global challenges. In addition to the important work of internal champions, some of whom we'll get to speak to today, to shift the dial on finance for sustainable cooling, we also need bank management and shareholders to understand the strategic importance of cooling across portfolios. So on everything from energy to agriculture to cities and beyond, and the opportunity that this presents for a pipeline of investments. And I think this is where national cooling action plans are really a critical tool for success. As we've heard multiple times today, national cooling action plans help shareholders and banks understand and map the cooling needs in their countries and communities. They help coordinate action across ministries, which we've just heard a great example of. They set trajectories and provide certainty for industry and can really be a springboard to attract investment in order to implement the plans. For example, as we heard earlier today from Director General Kabera of Rwanda, the development of a national cooling action plan for Rwanda has really catalyzed a shift in the cooling sector from enforcing Africa's most ambitious minimum energy performance standards to hosting the Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain. And Rwanda's National Cooling Action Plan has unlocked at least 4 million in funding for implementation, and with a potential further 3 million in funding in 2022. This success, I think, really demonstrates that designing a strategic approach to cooling at the national level can attract significant finance to then transform the cooling economy. Globally, 27 countries have published or are developing national cooling action plans, including 5 in Africa. The Clean Cooling Collaborative, formerly Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, has really played a pivotal role in supporting countries in the development of those first national cooling action plans, both regionally and globally. But there is still need for funders to finance the development of national cooling action plans. And international donors, including the funders that will join us today for the roundtable, have a role to play in closing this funding gap in financing additional national cooling action plans and promoting the use of the NCAP methodology that Satish, Jerry, and Marco just outlined earlier. So with that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our fantastic panel. And without further ado, please welcome Sabine Bassanyat, Senior Energy Efficiency Specialist with the Green Climate Fund, and Jalal Shabshub, Chief Investment Officer, Energy Efficiency Expert with the African Development Bank. Welcome to you both. A pleasure to speak with you today. Kicking off right away, both the Green Climate Fund and the African Development Bank are organizations that work to unlock financing for sustainable cooling in a range of ways. I'd like to ask you if you could please share with the audience how they can access what your institutions have to offer. And Jalal, I'll start with you. Could you please share with us what the African Development Bank has to offer?
Great, thank you so much, Larissa, and thank you for Brian and the team for inviting me in this great webinar. Well, as you know, one of the focus of the African Development Bank in the energy efficiency field is to support, in general, the development of the and implementation of energy efficiency programs. But we have a focus on different sectors, but also with a specific motivation on the residential sector, where the potential is quite important, and where also the impact is significant for the peak load reduction, especially the one that bring much benefit to the utilities in their demand side management program. Replication also opportunities are also considered in our focus. Not only replication in Africa, but also the replication within the countries. I mean here, putting in place the system or the mechanism or the program that can have impact not only on one technologies, but on the different technologies. Here I'm referring mainly to the on-bill financing scheme that we are working on to put in place that can help the different potential program through almost the same process to be implemented, providing a more less risky program to investor and also to the end user on the technical and financial aspect, and provide some confidence in the implemented program by reducing risk. And here we are talking about technical risk, we are talking also about the financial risk, and also potential problems that are existing on the market related to some technologies that need to be implemented, or the problem faced of some technologies, for example, like low quality of air conditionings or low quality of refrigerators or the lightings and so on, that people will not adapt high efficient one, since we do have a really very low quality problems in the countries. But anyway, we try to bring in place or to put in place the kind of activities that help promoting energy efficiency, that help promoting also or filling the gaps that might be or exist in the different countries. But in general, cooling is a part of our targeted field in the residential and also in the public sector, where we are also supporting the development of the super ESCOs and energy providers, ESCOs business, to provide energy performance contracting with the guaranteed results and so on, where also cooling, it's a big part of what we are doing. We are also supporting other options for district cooling where appropriate in the different countries. And here it is the support what we are providing, for example, in Tunisia, for the assessment of the district cooling options for the health sector. So here we are looking on the energy providers as a solution to promote activities. But just going back a little bit to your question, what are the existing potential windows for project financing? We do have different options based on the needs and support needed for each on the countries. But here we are working on the technical and financial aspect of the different project and program development. But in a nutshell, we provide technical assistance for the countries to assess opportunities as general market evolution and potential options, and also a more detailed study for options prioritization and program design. We also put available financing options for the countries based on the needs, sovereign or non-sovereign. So it will be public or private as line of credit, and also different guarantee schemes and co-financing with the other MDPs. So here we are providing different support from the technical side and project development, but also on the financial side with the potential options as direct loan to the government or to the private sectors, and with the needed also guarantee needed, especially from the private sector. So let me conclude here. Back to you.
Thank you, Jalal. That's really great to hear about how the African Development Bank is integrating sustainable cooling across your portfolio, and it sounds like with multiple financing options, which I'm sure we'll come back to. Sabine, turning to you with the same question, can you tell the audience what the Green Climate Fund has to offer on sustainable cooling?
Okay. Thank you so much, Larissa, and thank you for the Cool Coalition for this. I hope you're hearing me. I'm sorry. I'm in a busy environment right now.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you well.
Perfect. Thanks, Larissa. So from the Green Climate Fund, I mean, I think one of the key things for us is the cooling basically falls into our energy efficiency as well as our urban scape as well. And then for us, the funding basically falls into, I think we have 3 funding windows where we can really deal with cooling. One is what we call our readiness window, which is working with our NDAs and the countries to really kind of develop a technical assistance package to really kind of come up with ideas in terms of what is the cooling need. I mean, so we heard from Satish on developing ICAP. I mean, these are things that we can do with our readiness to really kind of work with the countries and through our NDAs to really develop your national cooling action plan, and then figure out what are the different elements of the plan that can be developed. And then our second funding window is what we call our project preparation facility. That one is basically it's more working with our AEs to really kind of go deeper into this. Now that you've identified what your cooling needs are, but you need to kind of really go deeper into it. What is the market assessment? What is the feasibility? And that's where the project assessment, the project preparation facility comes in. And then our third window is our larger window, which is our funding packages, or what we call our funding proposals. And these are, the large, which can be from $1 million to going up to, the sky's the limit almost, or up to what our bank account is. So, and that one is really about developing, different elements in the implementation, and how do you really bring about the different parts of the cooling system into implementation. So just to kind of give you an example, let's just say on the readiness, you identify that, okay, you want to develop a national cooling action plan, which has 7 different elements in there. And then through the PPF, you basically pick out, let's just say the space cooling, for instance. And then from the funding proposal, then you can really go into the into that space cooling and say, okay, what are the different elements of the space cooling that's needed? I mean, from everything from regulations to policies to actually setting up different types of funding mechanisms that can help, right? So I mean, now I can actually say this a little bit. I mean, when we were doing this with LAC, we weren't really sure, but now for our board meeting that's coming up for October, we actually have a project that is a cooling facility with the World Bank that covers 9 countries across the globe, and 4 of them are actually in Africa. In Somalia, Sao Tome, Principe, as well as in Kenya and Malawi, which looks at different parts of the cooling systems, from cold chain supply to off-grid cooling to vaccination chain, as well as to space cooling as well. And one of the things that we're really working with the World Bank, as well as and what we would like to work with other entities on, is different business models that can actually work, right? So I mean, and that's what the GCF is all about, is about testing business models at scale. And so we would really like to not just kind of look at a small pilot, but look at a pilot that can really be demonstrative, and then that can really kind of say, okay, if this has worked in Kenya in this regard, then let's kind of use that as a model to replicate to other places as well. So that's what we're really trying to achieve. And then going back to readiness again, I mean, I think readiness is a key thing for us, because I mean that it's $1 million per country per year. So it is a quite a bit of substantive money for doing technical assistance work, but that really helps to really kind of develop ideas, to really kind of generate new initiatives inside the country as well. So I think we would like to basically kind of, do a combination of making sure that, the countries have that readiness built up, as well as, and then use that funding proposal to really kind of bring that readiness to implementation. So, that's where we're trying to get at, and we're really looking forward to this next board where we get that funding proposal approved and getting that first large cooling facility approved and running. So, yeah, over to you, Larissa. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sabine. It's really helpful how you've laid this out of, you have the readiness package that can allow countries to develop an NCAP. You have the project preparation fund, which can allow them to go a bit deeper, and then potentially even larger funding packages to take implementation forward. And we'll keep an eye out for an outcome from the board meeting in October, because that cooling facility sounds really fantastic. Staying with you for the next question, and staying on NCAPs, of course. National cooling action plans are a stock take, but they're also an opportunity to look forward at the status and the challenge of cooling across both mitigation and adaptation. And they give us a sense of what policy levers a country has in place already for acting on sustainable cooling. Can you tell us a bit, Sabine, about how the process of developing an NCAP can be beneficial to a country who's submitting a related GCF project? And can these be combined with other sources, such as complementary projects through the Global Environment Facility?
Thanks, Larissa, and I think that's a great question, and I think it's a yes to all of them. Why are NCAPs so important to us? I mean, I think for us, when we're looking at a funding proposal, I think the basis of a funding proposal for us, it really is driven by what the country's ambitions are, what the country wants to, where the country wants to head towards, and then and then we want to provide that financing that really helps that country meet its ambitions, and that's what the NCAPs provide. The NCAPs provide that one is that the forward-looking vision. It provides the ambition, and then that really helps us to kind of evaluate. Yes, we are making the right decision when we're financing a project based on an NCAP, or if it's based on any other project that they've done. So what we're really looking for is yes, we would like to really kind of invest in large projects, but I mean, and when a project is really embedded in something like an NCAP, or if it's embedded in something like a JEF project that they've already kind of laid the groundwork for, that helps us out immensely. Because I mean, since we don't do direct investing like Jalal and the African Development Bank, and we really rely on African Development Bank, World Bank, to really kind of tell us what kind of project works. So for us, an NCAP or even a project with Jeff, that those are valuable evidence that basically shows that that the country wants to head towards this direction, and we are it's worthwhile for us to really be putting our valuable dollars into that investment. So it's very important, and that's why I think I was even in my last intervention I was saying that why I feel readiness is so critical is because I mean we want to basically drive that ambition in the countries, and really kind of get the countries to really think about, ideas and really develop these ideas so that, that we can actually come in and invest, or we can work with our partners to invest. So yeah, I think this is very, very critical. And then and we would really encourage countries to really think about this, and getting more NCAPs in place, put more MEPs in place, so that helps us to also, come with you to go on this journey together to really get that investment done.
Thank you, Sabine. That's a really great point on how NCAPs help to signal the strategic importance of cooling and to define those priorities and the investment pipeline. Coming back to Jalal, the African Development Bank has a strong history on supporting the cooling sector financially and technically, as you've described already, and also at different levels, including cities and national governments and utilities. from your perspective, how can the National Cooling Action Plan process be beneficial for coordinating African Development Bank support for countries on cooling? And how has the African Development Bank financial and technical support on cooling evolved in response to countries and cities' changing needs? And just for sake of time, maybe you can try to keep to 2 or 3 minutes so we can get our last question in.
Will do my best. Okay, so we definitely believe that that NCAP will play an important role in laying down the initial pillars and provide a more enabling environment for development and implementation of the energy efficiency cooling program. And these honestly are missing in most of the countries. The NCAP will bring the needed parameters, information, data to understand first the current situation about cooling, such as equipment stock, performance, operation mode and conditions, and user behavior also, notably for equipment acquisition, but also identifying main barriers and gaps, notably for the needs on policy and regulatory side, where it is important, and especially also for the recycling process that have also been mentioned, and options needed to be to put in place to cover all the cooling aspects of the project. Let me highlight here that the energy efficiency programs need the involvement of all the different stakeholders, and this was very well highlighted by Satish. So it is not a matter to put in place financing. It is more broader than that. We have to understand very well the ground where we are working, the needs, especially on the technical and financial side, identify barriers and tailor adequate options and strategy to mitigate the inherent risk and set priorities for successful program implementation, based not only on the potential savings, but on the success factors to have end user adopt and participate in the proposed energy efficiency program or in the cooling program. As well presented by Satish and Gary, the methodology proposed by NCAP clearly bring and provide most of the answers and indicators needed to make a sound decision to go forward, and this include also the financial needs for the identified options. So no doubt NCAP will bring or will open the door to different stakeholders to energy efficiency, cooling program development and implementation. Unfortunately, energy efficiency is not considered as a priority in the different African countries' agenda, and the demand on the energy efficiency financing, including cooling, is still into lowest level. However, we are deploying different effort in creating more enabling environment to bring out the opportunities for energy efficiency program and increasing awareness, but not only the benefit of implementing project, but also the potential problems and risk for energy security if nothing will be done, and especially in the cooling space that represent a potential risk to meet the evolving electricity demand, especially for countries with discrete cooling season. So to include, we continue exploring the options to support countries and joining international trends and benefit from the stream to provide more additionality for the energy efficiency cooling. Back to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for summarizing. I think a really great point on how it's not only about financing, but also how MDBs are knowledge banks on this topic, and then of course on the critical issue of addressing cooling for energy security. Well, I think we won't have time for our last question, but that's all right. I think you've answered it. And please do check out the programs that Jalal and Sabine have highlighted in their comments. And thank you so much to both Jalal and Sabine for their comments today. I'll hand back now to Brian to bring us to a close. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Excellent roundtable. And I won't pose the question, but one of the things I wanted to tease out that I had heard Sabin mention is that the work that is done by GCF and I assume by extension as well at African Development Bank is complementary to what the World Bank and others offer. So there are opportunities to look at projects that are complementary. You might pursue multiple opportunities simultaneously. It's not as if you could only go after GCF opportunities in and of themselves, but rather you could look at blended approaches where for different aspects of what you're trying to achieve with NCAP development or implementation, there are different resources available out there. So thank you very much to the roundtable. And now I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Angel Lucy, who's the head of the sub-regional office for UNEP in West Africa. Angel, if you want to go ahead and share some closing perspectives from what you've heard today. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Brian. I've been following with great interest from the start to the end. And this has really been from my own assessment, even not preempting on what others will say. This has been a very rich webinar, and I'm really happy, to have been part of it. So in closing, I would like to just make a few remarks. The Excellencies, distinguished participants, we've come to the end of today's very informative and interactive regional capacity building workshop for Africa on delivering energy efficient and climate-friendly cooling through national cooling action plans as part of the Africa Climate Week this year. So first, allow me to thank all colleagues from the United for Efficiency and the Cool Coalition for organizing this workshop, and Sustainable Energy for All, and the European Third Generation Environmentalism, and the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy for the engaging discussions on a crucial topic, for climate action and sustainable development, which is the need for a rapid transition to efficient and climate-friendly cooling for all. During the discussions, we have heard from countries' representatives, global experts and international donors on why we should urgently act on cooling and do so comprehensively, and what it takes to develop strategies to accelerate the transition to sustainable cooling and how to do it. So during the workshop, Cool Coalition and U4E experts outlined the importance of use of national cooling action plans and CAPES as a starting point to develop comprehensive action on cooling. NCAPs are key to coordinate action on energy efficiency and hydrofluorocarbons phase down, and to proactively address growing cooling needs while reducing the climate impact of cooling practices. They have helped us understand how NCAPs can help countries deliver simultaneously on the Paris Agreement, Sustainable Development Goals, and the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, while pursuing national priorities and socioeconomic benefits. Representatives from Kenya, from Nigeria, South Africa, and Rwanda have outlined the steps that their countries have taken, and which could inform other countries to act on cooling comprehensively. They underlined how efforts to push for energy efficiency improvement and the refrigerant transition can and should go hand in hand. This speaks to the importance and opportunities of the work Cool Coalition is doing through dedicated working groups and other projects in the region of Africa. We would like to thank these champion governments for their endeavor and leadership, and we hope their experience will inspire others on the region to develop NCAPs. Luckily, we now have a growing number of tools that for countries to use to develop strong and comprehensive NCAPs. Today, we also heard from Cool Coalition and AEEE experts about the new Cool Coalition NCAP methodology developed together with UNESCAP, UNEP, UNDP, World Bank Group, Clean Coalition Collaborative, Sustainable Energy for All, and others. This tool provides a modular, adaptable, simple but comprehensive guidance to conduct cooling data assessment, develop future demand projections, and identify what actions can be taken to reduce emissions and energy use while ensuring access to cooling for all. We invite all countries in the region to use this methodology to develop NCAPs and to connect with the Cool Coalition to get additional support. Finally, we have heard from the Green Climate Fund and the African Development Bank about opportunities on finance for countries that wish to develop NCAPs. Our panelists have also outlined the invaluable role of NCAPs in guiding funding prioritization and the provision of sustainable cooling capacity building, technical support, and investment. We hope that this workshop has provided you with a comprehensive overview of why your countries should develop NCAPs, how to do it with the support of the Cool Coalition methodology, and what technical, policy, and financial support exists to do so. As was mentioned while opening the workshop, we need to act quickly and boldly to break the vicious cycle of cooling and warming. National cooling action plans can help countries identify priority interventions and adopt a holistic and integrated approach to accelerate the transition to efficient, climate-friendly cooling for all. We look forward to seeing the implementation of a comprehensive approach to sustainable cooling in countries throughout Africa and hopefully in other regions of the world. So thank you so much, and over to you, Brian. Thanks again.
Thank you. Yes, wonderful recap. And we can see in the chat box, my colleague Irene has posted the availability of the Cool Coalition methodology. You can go to coolcoalition.org to find that and other information. We will post this recording in due course, and we'll also be following up via email with recap information about this session. So with that, I thank you all, wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and best of luck as you get started with your NCAPs, either finishing them up as we heard from the panelists or getting started in the first place. Take care, thank you for your time, and we'll stay in touch. Bye-bye.